Hello and welcome to another entry in this series where I explore some games and franchises that began life on a particular system. This time it's the home computer that made me fall in love with games back in the 80s, Acorn's BBC Micro. Whether you're familiar with the Beeb or not, chances are you've heard of at least a couple of these, some being one-off games and some being franchises that have spanned decades since their original incarnations. Many of these were released simultaneously on Acorn's other home computer, the Electron, but I'll let you know if that's the case. So let's have a look at 8 games and franchises that started out on the BBC Micro. Let's begin with a game that, of any on the list, you're more likely to know about, Elite. Elite was a space trading game co-developed by David Braben and Ian Bell, published by Acorn Soft for the BBC Micro in 1984, with an Acorn Electron version following not long after. You play as a spaceship commander, making his way through the vastness of space, trading and accumulating credits, which can be obtained by several means, including piracy, mining, bounty hunting and the aforementioned trading. At first you pilot a small ship, but earned credits can be spent on a number of upgrades, like increased cargo capacity and more powerful weaponry, etc. Some of the more interesting ship upgrades include a cloaking device and a device that allows you to harvest fuel from stars, negating the need to purchase it. Fuel plays a part in how far your ship can travel. Travel between solar systems is possible only through the use of a hyperspace jump, with the fuel limiting these jumps to a maximum of 7 light years at a time. The game contains an impressive number of procedurally generated planets. There are 8 galaxies, each with 256 planets to visit. Of course, you'll encounter hostile enemy ships while you explore space, and raising your combat abilities to elite status gives the game its name. Elite started out as a more arcadey 3D space shooter, but evolved to include the trading aspects and was one of the first examples of 3D wireframe graphics in a home computer game. The creators were heavily influenced by several popular sci-fi TV shows and films. The two things that set Elite apart were its sheer size and the freedom it gave the player. If you want to fly around trading legitimately you can, but if you want to partake in some less than legal dealings then you could do that too, trading slaves and drugs. The rewards were higher, but so were the risks. For 1984, Elite was a title that absolutely shook up the gaming industry and has influenced countless titles since. Being one of gaming's longest running franchises, Elite received a great number of ports, including the Apple II, Amstrad CPC, Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum, Acorn Archimedes, DOS, Amiga, Atari ST, NES, and a couple of Japanese home computers. Most versions differed from the original in some way, adding their own quirks or additional gameplay aspects. An enhanced version was also released for the BBC Micro on floppy disk in 1986. DOS received 2 versions, the first in 1987 and Elite Plus in 1991, which had updated graphics and an extra galaxy. Elite had 3 sequels, the first being Frontier Elite 2 in 1993, then Frontier First Encounters in 1995, and most recently the crowd-funded Elite Dangerous in 2014. As I said, the reach of Elite's influence was far and wide, surpassing perhaps every other game of its era. Revs is a racing game written for the BBC Micro and published by Acorn Soft in 1984. Although the title might not be as recognisable as Elite, its designer probably is, Jeff Crammond, famous for creating some hugely successful racing games including 1989's Stunt Car Racer and the Formula 1 Grand Prix series, which was very highly praised in the 90s and ran until 2002. Revs is based around Formula 3 and laid the groundwork for Crammond's later Grand Prix series with its simulation realism. It was revolutionary in that it had various settings for the car, a full 3D racetrack and basic AI opponents. It might not look like much, but in 1984 and on the Beeb, this was damn impressive stuff. The track is based on Silverstone, although 4 more were added with an expansion and subsequent re-release. Revs was only ported to the Commodore 64 in 1985. This time it featured 2 tracks plus the 4-track expansion. Although it was only ported to one system, the influence of Revs was a knock-on effect as it inspired the Grand Prix series, which became some of the most influential Formula 1 games of the 90s. Repton was programmed for the BBC Micro and Acorn Electron by Tim Tyler and published by Superior Software in 1985. Not to be confused with the Defender clone called Repton, which I already covered in the Apple II episode. This was one of my childhood favourites on the BBC Micro. In the 80s, the term bedroom coder was quite literal. Games were designed completely by individuals, often very young. Repton is the first example on this list and has one of the youngest creators. Brit Tim Tyler was only 16 at the time. Repton is a top-down puzzle game very similar to Boulder Dash, and Tyler was reportedly inspired when he saw a review of Boulder Dash but hadn't actually played it. The aim is to navigate a maze and collect all the diamonds in a level. Boulders will drop when you pass underneath them, so be careful not to get crushed, trapped or block your path to any diamonds. Some diamonds are locked in safes, so keys must be obtained before retrieving them, and dangerous monsters will hatch from eggs if they're dropped. A pretty simple idea, but it could be fiendishly tricky. Repton had several sequels, the first few again for the BBC Micro, which were much larger than the 12-level original. Over the years, the series has received numerous ports, coming to Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum, DOS, Game Boy Advance, PSP, Windows and Linux, and even several mobile platforms as recently as 2018. Another childhood favourite of mine here, Daredevil Dennis, published by Vision's Software Factory in 1984 for the BBC Micro and Acorn Electron. Its programmer Simon Pick was again just 16 years old. You play as stuntman Dennis as he rides various vehicles through screens full of dangerous hazards. These come in various forms: gaps, static obstacles like houses and trees, vertically moving obstacles like policemen and spiders, and horizontally moving vehicles including boats and helicopters. Levels take place on land where Dennis rides a motorbike, or on water where he rides a jet ski, and there are snowy levels where he's on skis. It always made me laugh that when he's on skis, crashing still results in a fiery explosion. The game's presented as a film shoot, and if Dennis takes more than 3 takes, i.e. lives, then the director fires him. Each screen has 4 platforms, each containing its own hazards, and when Dennis leaves the end of one, he appears at the start of the next, so anticipating the next platform's obstacles is essential to survive. Controls are very simple indeed, with accelerate, brake and jump. Simple controls don't necessarily equate to a simple game though. This can be insanely hard even at the lowest difficulty levels. Whenever I introduce someone to this game and they think it's hard, I always get them to try the highest difficulty level just for a laugh. I don't think I ever got past the second obstacle. This is a bit of an exception because the original Daredevil Dennis was exclusive to Acorn's computers, but a sequel, imaginatively titled Daredevil Dennis The Sequel, was released for the Commodore 64. It expanded on the idea and switched things up a bit, but still only displayed Daredevil Dennis on the cover. Exile was co-developed by Peter Irvin and Jeremy Smith for the BBC Micro and Acorn Electron, published by Superior Software in 1988. This game blew me away more than any other title on the BBC as a kid. Even the box art fascinated me, looking like some mental sci-fi version of the Planet of the Apes. This was a game that was just so epic in scale at the time, and in fact was so large that it intimidated me as a kid. Set a couple of hundred years in the future, you play as a member of a space exploration team visiting this planet on a rescue mission. When you land on the planet, a rogue engineer turned insane nicks a bit of equipment from your ship, rendering it unusable. You then explore the planet with its network of huge caverns, battling hostile creatures and robots, rescuing survivors, and eventually defeating the mad engineer so you can escape in your ship. The network of underground caverns is huge, like really big for a BBC micro game, and is procedurally generated. You have weapons with which to shoot enemies and a jetpack, both charged with energy cells found across the planet. Some enemies are pretty hard to kill, so you'll need to lure them into traps to get rid of them. There are several teleportation devices which will send you all around the map, but you can also set designated safe areas which, when severely damaged, you'll teleport back to. There are numerous upgrades and items to collect which will let you progress to otherwise inaccessible areas. There are also switches and blast doors, some of which must be blown open using explosives. Some of the intended uses for items were quite obscure though, so it could be easy to get stuck. Another thing that immediately attracted me to Exile was its digitised speech, like the initial "Welcome to the land of Exile" or enemy robots threatening you while in pursuit, which was oddly terrifying. Where Exile really packed a punch was with its physics and AI. It has a full physics model complete with gravity and inertia. It really felt so much more realistic when flying around in your jetpack than any other game had even come close to. It also simulated the elements, including wind rushing through the tunnels of the caverns, fire and water. The explosions were particularly thrilling, complete with shockwaves that affected surrounding characters and objects. Bear in mind this was 1988, before the concept of a video game having a physics engine even existed. The AI was also very advanced, with enemies becoming alerted to noises within their range, detecting the player using line of sight, and most impressively, they would even remember the player's last known location. This made some of the enemies pretty relentless in their pursuit, chasing you right across the caverns, even when teleporting. Easy to take for granted today, but these gameplay mechanics were revolutionary at the time. Pretty amazing really. In the early to mid 90s, Audiogenic published ports of Exile for the Commodore 64, Amiga, Atari ST and CD32, and there was also a cancelled iOS version. Although it rarely gets a mention outside of BBC Micro circles, Exile was a landmark title. It pioneered physics in video games before that was really even a thing, and was an early example of the gameplay style where you explore and retrace your steps with extra items that's come to be known as Metroidvania. Killer Gorilla was an unashamedly blatant copy of Donkey Kong, created by Adrian Stevens for the BBC Micro and published by Micropower in 1983. Much like Repton's creator basing his game from Boulder Dash reviews, Stevens used magazine screenshots of Donkey Kong for his basis for Killer Gorilla. I won't bore you with the details, you can pretty much see what the gameplay entails, and as a Donkey Kong clone it should be obvious to anyone. I played this a lot as a kid, and although it was a facsimile of Donkey Kong, it was really well designed and a lot of fun. Killer Gorilla was ported to the Acorn Electron and Amstrad CPC in 1984. It also appeared on several game compilations, including Superior Software's Play It Again Sam 3 in 1988, which is how I first played it. There was also a Killer Gorilla 2 that I played a lot, but this was withdrawn from sale after a cease and desist from Atari Soft, who owned the home computer rights, although I have no idea how that didn't happen with the first game. Killer Gorilla 2 was also on Play It Again Sam 3, along with Commando and Palace of Magic. What a compilation that was. In a strange turn of events, Atari Soft then hired Stevens to officially port Donkey Kong Jr. to the BBC Micro, but it was scrapped before release. Frak was programmed for the BBC Micro and Acorn Electron by Nick Pelling and was published by Aardvark Software in 1984, Pelling's own label. Frak is a platform game starring Trog, a caveman. An intro screen sets the scene, telling you that the aim is to collect all the keys on a level that have been hidden by the Scrubblies. You need to watch out for balloons and daggers, and you're equipped with a yo-yo. Trog jumps from platform to platform, climbing and descending ladders and ropes as he searches for all the keys needed to complete the level. The enemy Scrubblies come in 3 forms, each behaving differently. Both balloons and daggers will kill Trog, as will the Scrubblies. Balloons float vertically upwards and daggers travel diagonally downwards as if thrown by some anonymous angry bird. These hazards, and of course the enemies, can be hit with Trog's trusty yo-yo. The intro screen also warns that should the time run out, the level will fall into darkness and Trog's ability to yo-yo the balloons and daggers will disappear. Frack was highly praised for its graphics, in particular the character designs, which were quite cartoony when compared with its contemporaries. Sadly, the BBC Micro version had a mere 3 levels, after which the game loops, occasionally rotating the player's perspective. Frack only received 1 port on the Commodore 64 in 1985. Like Killer Gorilla, it made its way to another of Superior Software's compilations, Play It Again Sam 4 in 1988, sadly an entry in the series that passed me by. An Amiga port was worked on in the 90s, but wasn't completed. Thrust was programmed by Jeremy Smith, who I mentioned earlier as one of Exile's creators, and was published on the BBC Micro by Superior Software in 1986. Taking inspiration from Atari's Gravitar, Thrust sees you pilot a ship around a planet, both in the air and in underground caverns. The aim is to pick up objects, I never was quite sure what they were, and transport them to space. The physics in this game were just so advanced for the time, with your ship having significant momentum when moving and gravity coming into play. As a result, once your ship is tethered to an object, they affect each other's movement and momentum, making it very tricky indeed. Navigate the narrow caverns while taking care not to smash your ship or your cargo into the walls. Fuel is a limited resource but can be replenished by grabbing these fuel containers with your ship's tractor beam. There are enemy turrets too which will shoot at you but can also be destroyed using your ship's gun. Occasionally there are doors which are unlocked by shooting these controllers on the walls. A game that was challenging but fair and addictive enough to keep me interested. Thrust was ported to the Acorn Electron, Commodore 64, Atari 8-bits, Amstrad CPC, ZX Spectrum and Atari ST. Strangely, although designed on and for the BBC Micro, the Commodore 64 port actually came out before the BBC Micro version. This is why the BBC cover displays the text, a #1 bestseller, as it did very well on the Commodore 64. Thrust received a sequel in 1988, Thrust 2, which again came to several home computers. Thrust inspired many other similar games throughout the 80s and 90s. So that was 8 games that started out on the BBC Micro. Let me know if you've played any of these and on what systems. No doubt I'll see you for another one soon. Thanks for watching.